Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. We've been bringing documentaries from all around the world to here in San Francisco for the last 24 years. And as you know, we love a good story. So it was really neat to run across this documentary, The Whole Story, which you had a chance to see. And it's quite great. And we're lucky enough to have director Elijah Sullivan here for Q&A. Thanks, Elijah.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe a good place to start is how did you stumble upon this story and decide that there was kind of a larger film to make?
Well, I stumbled across it in the way that in a very small town way, which was drinking. We were telling weird stories over glasses of wine with a friend of a friend, trading weird stories, and she had the doozy of the night. And once I heard that one, I think I'd always been looking for a Mount Shasta story to tell because I grew up here. I'm still here. And I really wanted to tell a story about Mount Shasta, but it's such a sprawling, there's so many nooks and crannies. It's such a complex subject, and I never found something with a good through line. So when I finally found this story, I instantly thought, oh, I should write a newspaper article about this and get a job at the newspaper. And even though I'd wanted to be a filmmaker my entire life, somebody else had to tell me, you should make a documentary. And I went, oh yeah, I could make a documentary about it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized if it's such a good story, if I don't do it, somebody else will, and they're gonna mess it up. Because usually when people tell stories about Mount Shasta, almost 15 years ago when I heard this story, 2012, most representations of Mount Shasta in media were, fun, but they were things like, ancient aliens or something like that. And I I thought there was a whole aspect and dimension of Mount Shasta, several really, that never got touched upon. And so when I realized that if I didn't do it, somebody else was going to do it, I just leapt out of bed one morning and started doing it.
Oh, nice. And what were some of the first steps on that journey? And when you were telling people around town that you were working on it, what did they think?
Yeah, one of the first things I started doing was take advantage of the small town thing and just start asking people, any people I bumped into at work, people that I already knew. I knew some people who were involved in the Forest Service, so I started there, and um, most of them didn't know anything. But what would happen is I would ask somebody about it, and they said, I don't know anything about that, but that sounds really interesting. And then they would, every time I saw them, for the next 13 years of my life, they'd say, have you learned anything more about the whole? And so the more people I talked to, the more people were going, when's the movie coming out? When's the movie coming out? When's the movie coming out for 13 years? So, but I did occasionally learn little tidbits here and there. And I thought, this would take me like a summer to make, right? I know how to file a FOIA request. It's going to be easy. I'll get the files. It'll be easy. And the story took place literally, if you go a block over, there's the highway that goes up to where the hole was dug. Great, it's my backyard. Amazing. I'll spend the summer in nature. It'll be great. And the interviews, I'm like, oh, it's like everybody knows everybody here, like once or twice removed. I'll get all the interviews in no time. That first person that told me the story, her ex was one of the Forest Service employees who found the hole, and they bumped into one of the diggers in a social context later. So bam, bam, bam. Like I already had a bookend, I had
Wow,
the
nice.
third act reveal, I had all the different things, and then everybody said no. So so then it was much more of an uphill battle.
And what as you were kind of in the adventure of making the film, what um what was the story that you thought you'd tell, and like were there any surprises along the way?
Yeah, I think the movie's fairly close to what I thought I was going to tell. Um I maybe didn't include as much as I was hoping to weave in there, but I was already, bumping up against like the 90-minute mark, and there's so much in there. I sometimes can't believe how much I did cram in there. Um, I think maybe the biggest surprise was that whole middle section with Stephen Sindoni. I was not aware of him until a few years after I started.
Okay.
And when I started talking to him or started watching his videos and eventually talking to him, I realized, oh wow, this is a whole chunk of the story right here by itself. The movie might end up having to need to have a little middle episode where we have a very illustrative red herring.
Nice.
Yeah.
And, this being your first kind of feature documentary for those out here in the audience that might be considering, taking the leap of faith and making a film, like any, I guess, advice or suggestions or things to kind of prepare themselves as they get ready to
I've
take that leap of faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're in a great position right now because, I made this film for under $1,000.
Wow.
Production costs. It's probably more like six or 700, something like that in production costs. So just do it. Start making your movie because if you can keep those costs low, there's no risk. And I did everything wrong the first time. I did most things wrong the second time. I did most things wrong the third time. And I kind of failed my way upwards just through trial and error and took a really long time to do it. There were probably better ways to do it, but worst case scenario, you can just do it yourself for a very small amount of money and just trial and error it. Have to make a lot of mistakes, have to watch a lot of YouTube tutorials, but you can do it.
Nice. And have you had a chance to share the film locally yet? And what have people's been their response been?
Only a few locals have seen it so far. I haven't organized a screening yet. Um, I think the response is going to be pretty mixed. Um, I know I know, for example, Steven hasn't seen it yet, and he's not, he's pretty anxious about what he's hearing about the film. I tried to be fair. I tried to be kind. I tried to be compassionate. That was one of the reasons I made the film, was I felt like I wanted to see a
Yeah.
version of the film where it wasn't overly credulous, but it also wasn't overly mocking. And I hope locals see that effort in the film. But it is also, I'm aware that I'm stirring the pot a little bit, so it's gonna be interesting.
Well, to an outsider, I think a very nuanced and interesting story. So I think it'll resonate. And so I think if anybody that comes into it, I think they're in for a good ride. And you show a lot of respect and curiosity for the story
Oh, thank
as
you.
you dig into it. Well, thanks again,
Thank you.
Elijah. Have a great day, and thanks again for being part of SF DocFest.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, man.